I called my sister-in-law and I said, "Are you guys evacuating?" There was a deep pause, and she finally spoke up and said, "Have you not watched any of the news reports today? It's coming straight for you." We would get out where, once again, I would lose every single material thing on this planet. So this week that I'm recording this has been exactly a week since I threaded the needle and came down the western way from Boone in torrential rain, having no idea really the extent of the damage that would be happening, but understanding as I was driving down that mountain that this was not good, that there was saturated ground. And especially when I came around a corner in what should have been a fairly rapidly moving river, but it looked like a swollen lake of brown water, I knew that the road that I was on was in trouble. I'm grateful I made it home. What I can tell you is that the aftermath, as we all know through news and as I'm listening to the reports from other ministry wives that are in that area, some of whom just had left a retreat with me, and some of whom are still without power. Gratefully, most of them were not flooded, those that I know of. And then my daughter, who she and her husband, 2.5 hours south of where I was, are still without power, and praying that they have power this evening. I think that might happen. It's awful. Helene came on shore at the rate of wind and rain that the Gulf Coast of Panama City and the Gulf Coast of Florida had not seen come in at that rate. This was unprecedented. Now, I've also seen a young woman who's posted something about global warming. This is not the time to talk about global warming. There's also been some that have posted things like, why didn't they evacuate? Because no one knew how to prepare for this kind of thing. And it was the perfect storm. Like, truthfully, you don't plan for a hurricane in upper state North Carolina or the western or eastern part of Tennessee and those mountains. You don't plan for a hurricane. By the time it gets to them, it's a rain event or it's a small wind event. No one could have predicted 40 trillion gallons of water rushing over some of those places. No one. Only God, the Creator. But what I've been dealing with some this week is the reality that in my lifetime, now I'm not young, I refuse to be called old, but what I can tell you is I've lost everything I own twice in my life. And no one can prepare you for when it's all lost. I write in my book, When God's Woman Wants to Give Up, about the day where I'm sitting in a spring day with the windows open in high school, and a young woman comes to the door, looks straight at me and says, "Your house is on fire. You've got to come with me. Your house is on fire." I can tell you that all I remember about that day was gathering up my things and running with her. I do not remember the ride home. There's one memory I remember. Maybe it's because we were going around a curve at such a drastic speed, because you see, I lived out in the country, 8.5 miles from anywhere close to something that would be able to help us. And so I'm thinking to myself, are we going to survive the ride? But most importantly, I'm looking at my house being on fire. I do remember rounding the corner after we've come down this valley, and I see one wall standing ablaze, and it was my bedroom wall. We would pull up The fire trucks were there. The volunteer fire department was there, wetting down the barn to keep it from going up in blaze. But we couldn't even get very close because the heat was so intense. That night, for the first time in my entire life, my family would pray together in a camping trailer that had been pulled up and a water hose hooked to it, a pop-up camping trailer, in fact. And we prayed together. It was a deeply spiritual prayer, but we began the recovery. My mom and dad drew out a house on a napkin, a piece of napkin and paper towel from food that people had brought in to us. And for the next 6 months or so, we would begin our rebuild. All of my senior year was about rebuilding. And we didn't have enough insurance. Do any of us ever have enough insurance when you're starting over like that? I wish I could tell you that the result of our building this beautiful home, that we would move in the following December on Christmas Eve, and it would start snowing that night. I wish I could tell you that all of it was a happy time. It was a hard time. My dad, who has since gone on to be with the Lord, he became a Christian several years after that, but he was an alcoholic. And so that time triggered him, and it was just a hard time in our family. But we made it. I made it. And we started over. Fast forward. We leave a church thinking and knowing, and really, even at this point, we know that we obeyed the voice of the Lord to come to southern Louisiana, to New Orleans, 2.5 weeks before Hurricane Katrina. Wow. Wow. That is an understatement. But we did. We came. We moved on campus. I was struggling because I didn't want to leave frontline ministry of being a ministry wife, but I had surrendered and submitted to the call of God on our lives. I remember the day that we were watching Hurricane Katrina, and I dropped my kids off at school and picked them up and had about a 40-minute drive across Lake Pontchartrain. And I called my sister-in-law and I said, "Are you guys evacuating?" They lived in Tallahassee. There was a deep pause, and that pause was finally answered. And she finally spoke up and said, "Have you not watched any of the news reports today? It's coming straight for you." I would get home. Preston and I would have a quiet meeting. We would watch the news reports, and then we would get out and head to Panama City Beach, opposite of Contraflow, really on the dirty side of the storm, where, once again, I would lose every single material thing, daily living thing I had on this planet. I wish I could tell you that I handled it well. I didn't. There was such a loss, and I brought back so many of those feelings of loss. And what happens is, when you are in that moment, when you know that life as you knew it, all the things that you materially use to identify you, I had my girls, and I was so grateful. I had my little red weenie dog. I had my husband. But to be honest, we didn't even know at that time if we would have a job, because Preston had been the last hired, And we didn't know during some of this time if he would have a job at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, where he was hired to teach evangelism and preaching. We didn't know. Now, obviously, we have started over, and obviously, my girls have grown up. They're now 29 and 26, and our sweet Polish girl that was frantic to find us, was in Poland and finally called me. And I remember where I was, standing in Walmart outside of Peachtree City, Georgia, where I'm trying to buy some socks because it's gotten cold and we don't have any socks. Our phones didn't work well. Guys, loss like this is unplanned for. And I don't care how you have planned for it. There are elements and levels of this type of loss that no one can plan for. So today, what I wanted to do is I've got a daughter I've already shared with you that is without electricity. I think by the time this is aired, she will have electricity. I have a daughter that's in an international missionary in Europe. That's one of our spiritual daughters. I have a daughter on the West Coast that has not been triggered like my daughter is 2.5 hours south. As we both have cried as we've watched people who were just like us during those days. So today I just want to speak to you just a bit about what it looks like to lose everything during that moment. And if you have Christ, there is a level of hope, and there are God's people helping right now. Today, you can check out our links that you can find in our link tree about disaster relief in Samaritan's Purse, two of the ministries I trust to be able to be boots on the ground in the most hard hit areas, and that will handle your money very good. I mean, it's probably the Red Cross as well, but I'm just saying that during that time, I want to share some things with you that I believe got me through. I was still healing from some church hurt during that time. And I can't tell you that I handled it all perfectly because the move had just been so new to us. But during that time, as I was reading and processing hurt and pain from church hurt, but now the loss of all the things that I counted dear, then what would God do? He would bring me to Isaiah chapter 43 in my daily reading. I remember it altering and riveting. Now, he'd already told me to forgive and release everyone that I felt had wounded me, and he used the last chapter of Job to do that. You can understand that. Go and read that. If you haven't read that in a while, go back and read the last chapter of Job. Then pick up my book. You can get one of those anywhere on Amazon and other places. And if you've attended one of my retreats, you have a copy of that. But the reality is that last chapter of Job tells us that God is going to take care of us, as he did with me on that balcony that day, that he'll take care of you. He's going to take care of us because he's a good God. But when you've lost everything that gives you meaning, purpose, and identity in life, you better have an anchor, a taproot, an anchor that says God is watching and he's going to deliver and take care of you. In fact, Isaiah 43 is the next passage of scripture that he had me go and read. And listen what it says. O Israel, the one who formed you says. O Diane, listen. The one who formed you says, do not be afraid. I have ransomed you. I have called you by name, and you are mine. When you go through the deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. And when you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. Now he goes on to tell us that he's going to protect him. He's speaking to his people after they've been so rebellious in the first chapters of Isaiah. Basically, he warned them and they basically did what they wanted to do. And now he's giving them a promise. That day when I read that, I started doing a deep study on that. I would find out later that the president of our seminary, Dr. Chuck Kelly, God would have given him this very same verse. But when I broke down this verse, this is what he says. When you go through the deep waters, I will be with you. In other words, when you're swimming through the flood waters, I'm going to be with you. And those flood waters are filled with all kinds of awful things. When you go through the flood waters, in other words, and in one translation, one thing that I looked at, it was when you go through pea water, sewage waters, I'm going to be with you. Sometimes when I think about the flash flooding that just happened, when I think about the flooding that happened in New Orleans, it was that kind of water. All the sewage waters let loose. He says, I will be with you. And when you go through the rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. Those rivers that are overflowing their banks, if we put our trust in him, we will not drown. And when you will not be burned up, the flames will not consume you. Listen, guys, that reference there is like when you get into the fiery furnace, not only will you not be consumed by the flames, but you will not even smell like smoke. I know that seems like an impossibility if you're walking through this time. And for some of you, you will not listen to this till much, much later because you have no way of listening to this. And so today, what I want to do is I just want to speak in the next few moments to those that haven't lost everything, to how you can help, not only physically and tangibly, how you can help those who have lost everything, who have lost all material things, and in some cases, they've lost loved ones. Because you see, life was altered for my family as a junior when I lost everything. And life was altered for my family and my two little girls living with me after Hurricane Katrina. It was pre-Katrina and post-Katrina. You know, I can remember my mom when I was a young junior and a young woman, then 17, 18 years old, that years later, my mom would tell me about going to look for something in the kitchen, like a little kitchen gadget, and she would realize that that gadget was pre-fire. Do you know that 20 years later, recently, I was looking for something and I thought first, because we're living in an apartment at this moment, I thought at first that must be in storage, but then realized that no, it wasn't in storage. That was actually pre-Katrina. I didn't have it anymore. It's gone. It's funny how your mind plays tricks on you. Thought my mom was so silly about that kind of thing, but realized, no, your mind plays tricks on you sometimes. And you can think that you have something and you don't. It's gone. So, a little emotional here. Didn't plan on that. Let me get a little Kleenex here. Here's the thing. If you are ministering to a person who's lost everything, or you want to, then one of the best ways is by giving monetarily to one of those two ministries I talked about. Or perhaps you need to give some money to someone you know that has lost everything and trust them to get what they need with it. Secondly, stop sitting back and thinking, man, I'm glad that didn't happen to us, or I don't know what I would do if I lost everything. You may not know what you would do. I hope you never have to know what you would do. I hope that you don't have to try to figure out, I don't have any identity. I don't have a driver's license. I don't have birth certificates. I don't have college graduation certificates. I don't have, I had to reproduce. We had to reproduce my husband's doctorate diplomas. All of that had to be reproduced. And gratefully, God worked it out for us to do that. But the first thing that happened after we went through Katrina was realizing the cold snap. I didn't even have socks for my girls. The loss was complete. It was total. I remember staying with a young couple in Fort Worth. They were a young seminary couple, and all of us were meeting at the seminary in Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, and realizing I didn't have a robe. I didn't even have a robe. I barely had something to sleep in. And so I went to a department store thinking I would get a robe, but getting caught on the way to the department store, getting caught in the household goods store and walking around going, I don't even have a fork. That's where some of these people are. I didn't even have a fork. I went from plenty to nothing. In the American church and in the American world, we get in this mindset, it's called first world issues. The rest of the world, there are places in our world that understand this kind of devastation and loss. But we have been fairly unscathed as a whole. But when you have something completely unprepared for, like the flash flooding from Helene, where you are caught in a mudslide and you have one suitcase for your entire family or 4 of 5, you not only not have a fork, but you don't have vehicles. You can't even get to your house. The road that you drove on is not there anymore. And so for us as people who do, we just need to help them see that God sees them. But we also need to be the hands and feet of Jesus. The way that my family survived is by knowing and understanding and seeing the hands and feet of Jesus through his people. Through his people. So first and foremost, pray for those people. Pray for them. Secondly, if you can be boots on the ground, they're going to need some help for a long time. Thirdly, give some money to both of these relief funds, or when you can, sacrifice and give some money. And then be sensitive to people. When you're giving, if you're donating something, one of the things that I learned during that time is that sometimes people want to feel good about themselves, and sometimes they really do want to help, but they'll give us. I remember during that time post-Katrina that my girls got broken toys because somebody just cleaned out their closet. They got games that had missing pieces and were unusable. They got secondhand stuff. Secondhand stuff is fine if it's in good condition. But I remember having stained clothing that I could not wash or get things clean. So if you're going to help, then do it in excellence. Do it the best you know how. Don't give broken things to people who have lost everything. Don't do that, please. There is a time for every season. And sometimes we are just weary and can get really skewed in how hard our life is, not realizing that there's a family trying to rebuild their entire life. So this week, I've been thinking a lot about loss and how God is faithful and that He will carry them through. This past week, I was asked to speak in Chicago, and the theme was the plantings of the Lord. The passage came out of Isaiah 61. Listen to what it says. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me, for the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to comfort the brokenhearted and to proclaim that captives will be released and prisoners will be freed. He has sent me to tell those who mourn that the time of the Lord's favor has come, and with it the day of God's anger against their enemies. To all who mourn in Israel, He will crown of beauty for ashes, a joyous blessed instead of mourning, festive praise instead of despair, and in their righteousness they will be like great oaks. Listen. They're going to make it, and you can help them make it. We need to be great encouragers, asking the Lord to anoint us and give us the words to speak and where to help those that need it most. That our intersection with people who need it, we need to help them. We need to help them. We need to encourage them. Every single thing that we can do for them, we need to do for them. If we can, if we can do it, we need to do it, and we need to encourage them. So I pray that you will be an encouragement to them, and that they will be like their great and mighty oaks planted by the rivers, and that they will recover and they will make it. I'm not the same person as I was 20 years ago. Praise the Lord. I'm not. My girls are grown and they're doing what they need to do for the Lord. And I'm just praying that you and I will be faithful to help those finish well. God bless.